Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. The question matters because H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic entities operate according to principles where human geography and temporal experience become meaningless, and understanding them requires acknowledging how provincial our categories of space and time actually are. Between 1917 and 1937, Lovecraft constructed the most comprehensive taxonomy of cosmic horror in Western literature. His pantheon spans from Yog-Sothoth, the blind idiot god writhing at reality's center, to the deep ones breeding with humans in decaying coastal towns, to entities so disturbing that even Weird Tales magazine, which published stories about necrophilia and cannibalism, refused to print descriptions of them. This wasn't random invention, but systematic mythology, each entity serving specific philosophical function in Lovecraft's vision of cosmos, fundamentally hostile to human consciousness. This investigation catalogs Lovecraft's complete bestiary across 4 ascending tiers of cosmic hierarchy: outer gods, great old ones, lesser entities, and servitor races, examining their literary origins, philosophical implications, and disturbing cultural persistence. We'll trace how these creatures evolved from Lovecraft's nightmares and anxieties into collaborative mythology spanning nearly a century. We'll confront the censored entity that Lovecraft himself considered too extreme to fully develop, exploring why certain horrors exceed even cosmic horror's generous boundaries. What we're analyzing isn't merely fictional monsters. These entities represent thought experiments about consciousness, encountering realities it cannot survive perceiving, about knowledge that destroys rather than empowers, about the possibility that human categories of meaning, morality, and sanity represent local illusions having no cosmic validity whatsoever. The catalog begins with the least powerful entities and ascends toward those whose mere existence threatens conceptual coherence. By the end, you'll understand why some knowledge was deliberately suppressed and why you're now complicit in its transmission. Howard Phillips Lovecraft created his cosmic pantheon across 2 decades of sustained literary output, from Dagon in 1917 through The Haunter of the Dark in 1936. This wasn't accidental accumulation, but deliberate construction of interconnected mythology, though Lovecraft himself resisted the systematic categorization that later scholars and fans would impose. His letters reveal ambivalence about creating coherent cosmology. He encouraged other writers to use his entities freely, while simultaneously insisting that cosmic horror should resist complete comprehension. This tension between world-building and world-obscuring defines the entire enterprise. Each new entity added layers to existing framework while introducing contradictions that prevented mythology from calcifying into mere fantasy genealogy. The personal circumstances generating these entities varied dramatically across Lovecraft's creative period. Dagon emerged from nightmares during his 1917 nervous breakdown, externalizing anxieties about biological degeneration and evolutionary regression. Cthulhu arrived in 1926 during a period of relative stability, representing Lovecraft's mature cosmicism, the philosophical position that human existence represents cosmic accident rather than divine purpose. The Elder Things and Shoggoths of At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, reflected his increasing interest in scientific materialism and deep time, attempting to imagine what genuinely alien biology and civilization might resemble. The Deep Ones of The Shadow over Innsmouth, 1931, channeled his horror of miscegenation and hereditary corruption, demonstrating how his racism infected even his most philosophically sophisticated work. Understanding the entities requires tracking these biographical and philosophical shifts. Lovecraft's correspondence network functioned as collaborative laboratory for entity development. He explicitly encouraged writers like Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, and Robert Bloch to incorporate his creations into their own stories, treating cosmic horror as open-source mythology rather than proprietary intellectual property. Smith contributed Tsathoggua and the Hyperborean cycle. Howard connected the mythos to his prehistoric adventure fiction, and multiple writers added obscure entities that Lovecraft would later reference, creating false impression of ancient, established mythology. This collaborative approach meant that by Lovecraft's death in 1937, the pantheon existed in distributed form across dozens of stories by multiple authors, preventing any single definitive account while suggesting phenomena too vast for individual perspective to encompass. The taxonomy problem emerged immediately after Lovecraft's death when August Derleth attempted systematic organization. Derleth classified entities into elemental categories: Cthulhu as water-based, Hastur as air-based, and imposed good versus evil cosmology completely foreign to Lovecraft's philosophy of cosmic indifference. This systematization satisfied certain readerly desires for comprehensive knowledge, but violated the fundamental principle that cosmic horror should resist human organizational schemes. The tension persists. Audiences want complete catalogs explaining each entity's powers, relationships, and weaknesses, while the genre's effectiveness depends on maintaining incompleteness and contradiction. Any attempt to explain every Lovecraftian monster inevitably domesticates exactly what makes them philosophically disturbing. Consider this carefully. Lovecraft created entities serving specific narrative and philosophical functions rather than building comprehensive fantasy bestiary. Azathoth represents mindless chaos at reality's foundation, suggesting that ultimate cosmic power coincides with complete absence of consciousness or purpose. Yog-Sothoth embodies all space and time simultaneously, forcing confrontation with human perception's limitations. Nyarlathotep provides necessary exception to cosmic indifference, active malevolence, allowing narrative conflict while serving mindless masters. Cthulhu's sleeping presence demonstrates that cosmic threats don't require immediate action to generate dread. Patient waiting across eons proves more disturbing than active antagonism. Each entity addresses different aspect of Lovecraft's central project, demonstrating human insignificance through beings whose mere existence renders human categories meaningless. The censored entity lurking at this catalog's end represents special case, creation so disturbing that even Lovecraft limited its development, or concept that later editors suppressed, or philosophical implication he himself found too nihilistic to fully articulate. References exist in fragmentary form across unpublished letters and rejected manuscripts, suggesting horror exceeding even generous boundaries of 1920s and 1930s pulp fiction. This suppressed element threads through the entire taxonomy, the absent center around which other entities orbit. Understanding why certain knowledge remains forbidden requires first understanding what the permitted entities already reveal, and what cultural, psychological, and philosophical traditions Lovecraft synthesized to create beings that continue disturbing readers nearly a century after their invention. Ancient cosmological systems provided Lovecraft with structural templates for hierarchical entity relationships, though he consistently inverted their metaphysical assumptions. Egyptian mythology's complex divine genealogies, atom-birthing Shu and Tefnut, the Ennead of Heliopolis, lesser gods serving greater powers, offered model for outer gods commanding servitor races. But where Egyptian cosmology positioned gods as maintaining cosmic order through Ma'at, Lovecraft's entities embody disorder, entropy, and indifference to human welfare. Sumerian and Babylonian creation myths featuring Tiamat's chaotic waters and Abzu's primordial depths influenced his oceanic horrors, particularly Cthulhu's submarine imprisonment and Dagon's emergence from Pacific trenches. Gnostic theology's concept of demiurge, false god creating corrupt material reality while claiming ultimate authority, resonates through Lovecraft's pantheon, where entities humans might worship as gods represent merely localized phenomena within vaster, more terrible cosmic hierarchy. Victorian spiritualism and theosophy's veil between worlds concept underwent radical transformation in Lovecraft's hands. Madame Blavatsky's hidden masters, supposedly guiding human evolution from higher planes, became, in cosmic horror, entities whose interaction with humanity produces madness and death rather than enlightenment. The spiritualist movement's optimistic belief that thin barriers separate material world from spiritual dimensions translated into Lovecraft's vision of reality's fabric as dangerously permeable, with horrors from outside constantly threatening to break through. But where spiritualists promise benevolent contact with ascended beings, Lovecraft suggested that anything capable of crossing dimensional barriers possesses motivations and nature fundamentally incompatible with human survival. This pessimistic inversion of occult revival tropes defined his entire approach, taking contemporary mystical frameworks and revealing their most nightmarish possible implications. Darwinian evolution provided scientific foundation for Lovecraft's entities while being simultaneously inverted and extended. His creatures represent alternative evolutionary paths, developing under different environmental conditions. The My-Go evolving on Pluto Yog-Sothoth, the elder things originating in interstellar space, the deep ones adapting to oceanic depths. This wasn't fantasy biology, but attempt to imagine what actual alien evolution might produce given different starting parameters and selection pressures. Yet Lovecraft consistently presented these alternative evolutionary branches as superior to humanity in age, power, and cosmic significance, inverting the anthropocentric assumption that human evolution represents pinnacle of biological development. The entities become evolutionary rebuke. We aren't the inevitable outcome of natural selection, but merely one branch among countless others, most of which preceded us by millions of years and will outlast us by similar spans. Dunsany's dream gods established template for Lovecraft's pantheon structure, particularly the conception of deities existing in dimensions accessible through dreaming rather than physical travel. Lord Dunsany's The Gods of Pagana, 1905, presented pantheon of indifferent gods creating and destroying worlds through whim rather than moral purpose, directly influencing Lovecraft's cosmic indifference. But where Dunsany maintained fairy tale aesthetics and ultimate cosmic justice, Lovecraft eliminated reassuring elements entirely. His dreamland's entities operate according to alien logic that occasionally intersects with human consciousness through sleep, but contact produces trauma rather than wonder. The dream realm becomes not escape from material limitations, but exposure to realities human neurology cannot process, with Nyarlathotep ruling those spaces as cruel deceiver rather than benevolent guide. Nietzschean philosophy permeates Lovecraft's entity conception, particularly the idea of beings beyond human moral categories. Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil describes not amorality, but value, systems completely orthogonal to human ethics, entities operating according to principles where human distinctions between right and wrong carry no more weight than human opinions about stellar fusion carry weight for stars. Lovecraft's outer gods embody this radical moral alienness. Azathoth doesn't choose chaos. It is chaos achieving sufficient complexity to appear conscious. Yog-Sothoth doesn't decide to exist across all time. Temporal omnipresence constitutes its nature. Attempting to judge these entities by human ethical standards represents category error, like attempting to morally evaluate gravity or entropy. This philosophical framework makes Lovecraft's pantheon more disturbing than conventional demons or devils, which operate within comprehensible moral universe, even as antagonists. The anthropological concept of primitive worship, accessing genuine cosmic forces rather than mere superstition, threads dangerously through Lovecraft's work. His stories frequently suggest that tribal rituals, cultist practices, and pre-Christian religions contact actual entities rather than worshipping imaginary constructs. This represents both sophisticated observation about religious phenomenology. All worship addresses something, even if not what worshippers believe, an expression of Lovecraft's racism, which consistently associated non-Western and non-white cultures with cosmic horror. The uncomfortable truth remains that Lovecraft's most philosophically interesting entities often emerge from his most repugnant prejudices. The censored entity at this taxonomy's core may represent apex of this troubling intersection, creation so infected by racism or so nihilistically conceived that even Lovecraft recognized it, exceeded acceptable boundaries. Whatever those boundaries meant for writer publishing in pulp magazine that regularly featured casual ethnic slurs and violence. These philosophical and cultural antecedents converged in Lovecraft's work to produce entities serving multiple simultaneous functions: narrative antagonists, philosophical thought experiments, expressions of personal anxiety, and symbols for various cultural fears about evolution, miscegenation, and cosmic meaninglessness. Understanding the pantheon requires tracking all these influences while recognizing that synthesis exceeds sum of parts. Lovecraft created something genuinely new by combining ancient cosmological structures, contemporary occult frameworks, scientific materialism, and philosophical pessimism into mythology that continues generating disturbing resonances nearly a century after its invention. Lovecraft's naming strategies divided entities into two distinct categories: those with constructed exotic phonetics suggesting ancient non-Western origins, and those with descriptive English titles emphasizing cosmic function. The first category includes Azathoth, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, Yog-Sothoth, and Shub-Niggurath, names deliberately designed to sound alien, unpronounceable, vaguely Oriental or Middle Eastern without corresponding to actual languages. Lovecraft created these through phonetic experimentation, combining harsh consonants and unusual vowel clusters to produce words that resist comfortable English pronunciation. The difficulty itself serves philosophical purpose. If human language evolved to describe terrestrial phenomena and human scale concerns, then entities existing outside those parameters should require terminology that human vocal apparatus struggles to produce. The unpronounceable name becomes linguistic proof of cosmic alienness. The second category employs descriptive epithets that function as provisional labels rather than actual names. The crawling chaos, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, the key and the gate, the lurker at the threshold. These titles acknowledge human inability to know entities' true names or nature, offering instead functional descriptions of observable characteristics or cosmic roles. This naming strategy mirrors scientific taxonomy's binomial nomenclature. We classify organisms by observable features rather than claiming to know their essential nature. But where scientific names aspire to precision and universality, Lovecraft's epithets emphasize limitation and incompleteness. The crawling chaos doesn't define Nyarlathotep, but describes one aspect of manifestation that human observers manage to perceive and survive reporting. The entity's actual nature presumably exceeds this partial description by margins human cognition cannot estimate. The unpronounceable name tradition extends beyond Lovecraft to fundamental question about language's relationship to reality. If certain cosmic truths exist that human conceptual frameworks cannot accommodate, then names for entities embodying those truths should resist integration into human language. Cthulhu's name famously appears in story as approximation, the closest phonetic rendering of sounds that aren't properly speech. This suggests the entity possesses actual name in whatever communication system it uses, but that name cannot be accurately represented in human phonemes. Every human pronunciation becomes mistranslation, approximation that loses essential meaning. The unpronounceable name forces confrontation with language's limits. We cannot name what we cannot conceive, and conception requires cognitive categories that cosmic entities violate by existing. Geometric and mathematical terminology pervades descriptions of entities and their environments, particularly non-Euclidean, applied to architecture, geometry, and entity structure. Lovecraft borrowed this term from actual mathematics. Non-Euclidean geometries, like Riemannian and hyperbolic space, do exist and describe curved spaces where parallel lines can intersect or diverge. But he deployed non-Euclidean as general signifier for spatial relationships that human perception cannot properly process. R'lyeh's architecture appears non-Euclidean not merely because it uses curved space, but because viewing it produces cognitive dissonance. Angles seem wrong. Proportions shift depending on viewing angle. Structures appear simultaneously concave and convex. The mathematical terminology lends scientific precision to descriptions while actually emphasizing how even mathematics, humanity's most abstract and universal language, fails when confronting certain cosmic realities. If geometry itself becomes unreliable, then human claims to objective knowledge collapse entirely. Color symbolism in Lovecraft's entity descriptions emphasizes impossible perceptions, particularly colors that supposedly exist outside normal spectrum. The color, out of space, presents entity or phenomenon, manifesting as shade, having no correspondence to known wavelengths, suggesting that electromagnetic radiation in cosmic contexts includes frequencies that terrestrial evolution never encountered and human vision cannot process. Other entities feature burning eyes or forms that glow with colors described as indescribable, linguistic paradox that forces readers to imagine what cannot be imagined. This impossibility serves specific function. If entities originate in dimensional or cosmic contexts, operating under different physical laws, then light emanating from them might possess properties that violate terrestrial physics. The impossible color becomes sensory proof that perceivers confront something fundamentally alien to their evolutionary environment. Body horror vocabulary reaches its limits in Lovecraft's entity descriptions, particularly the overwhelming prevalence of tentacles, eyes, and amorphousness. Tentacles appear across the pantheon: Cthulhu's facial tentacles, the outer gods' formless appendages, the Shoggoth's protoplasmic pseudopods. This obsessive repetition reflects both personal anxiety, Lovecraft's documented revulsion toward marine life and invertebrates, and genuine attempt to describe biological organization alien to terrestrial norms. Tentacles represent radical departure from bilateral symmetry and articulated limbs that characterize most terrestrial animals, suggesting entities evolved under different constraints or perhaps designed by non-terrestrial intelligence operating by aesthetic and functional principles incompatible with Earth biology. The proliferation of eyes, particularly eyes in wrong places, wrong numbers, or possessing wrong structure, emphasizes alien perception, suggesting these entities see reality differently than humans do, and that their vision might access dimensions or wavelengths that human neurology cannot process. The problem of describing the indescribable forced Lovecraft to develop sophisticated linguistic strategies for conveying horror that exceeds language's capacity. He frequently resorts to negative description, explaining what entities are not rather than what they are, cataloging the categories they violate rather than defining them positively. He employs synesthetic mixing, describing sounds as colors, shapes as textures, to suggest perceptions that don't fit human sensory categories. He uses contradictory adjectives simultaneously: immense yet infinitesimal, formless yet geometrically precise, forcing readers to hold incompatible concepts in mind, mimicking cognitive dissonance that cosmic horror should produce. These aren't failures of craft, but deliberate techniques for gesturing toward realities that resist direct articulation. The language itself becomes evidence of limitation, proof that some things genuinely exceed human capacity to name, categorize, or comprehend, including the censored entity whose very designation as forbidden depends on it possessing qualities that language cannot safely convey. Lovecraft's creation of false history through pseudo-textual references represents his most effective technique for lending cosmic entities verisimilitude. The Necronomicon, supposedly written by Mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred around 730 CE, appears across multiple stories as source text cataloging forbidden knowledge about the outer gods and great old ones. Lovecraft never wrote the complete Necronomicon. It exists only through fragmentary quotations and references, but provided elaborate publication history. Original Arabic title Al-Azif, translated to Greek as Necronomicon by Theodorus Philetas in 950 CE. Latin translation by Olaus Wormius in 1228. Suppression by various authorities. Rare surviving copies in Miskatonic University and British Museum. This bibliographic precision creates impression of genuine scholarship, documenting actual text, technique borrowed from horror tradition, extending back through Poe to Gothic novelists who framed fictions as discovered manuscripts. Other invented grimoires expanded the false textual network. Unaussprechlichen Quoten by Friedrich von Junst, the Pnakotic manuscripts, the Book of Eibon, De Vermis Mysteris, and Cote de Ghoul. Each text receives similar treatment: fictional author, publication details, historical suppression, cryptic quotations revealing cosmic truths. The cumulative effect suggests that multiple independent sources across different cultures and time periods document the same entities, creating scholarly consensus about phenomena that happen to be fictional. When the Dunwich Horror references both the Necronomicon and unspeakable Kulten describing Yog-Sothoth, readers encounter what appears to be cross-referenced verification from separate authorities, mimicking how actual research triangulates truth through multiple sources. The technique exploits trust in textual authority while revealing how easily that trust can be manufactured through bibliographic detail. Cross-story consistency elevated individual entities into mythological permanence through accumulated references. Cthulhu appears or gets mentioned in The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, The Dunwich Horror, 1928, At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, The Shadow over Innsmouth, 1931, and numerous other stories across years, each appearance adding details while maintaining core characteristics. Readers encountering Cthulhu in later stories bring knowledge from earlier appearances, creating sense of established mythology that exceeds any single narrative. The entity develops biography through this accretion. We learn it arrived on Earth millions of years ago, built Rulia in Pacific before continents assumed present positions, fell into death like sleep when stars became wrong, influences sensitive human minds through dreams, and waits for astronomical conditions permitting awakening. This accumulated lore makes Cthulhu feel documented rather than invented, phenomenon that multiple narratives happen to encounter rather than fictional construct created for specific story. Geographic grounding anchored cosmic entities to verifiable locations, blurring boundaries between fiction and reality. Antarctica houses the Elder Things city in At the Mountains of Madness, exploiting the continent's genuine mystery and inaccessibility in 1931. The Pacific Ocean conceals R'lyeh at coordinates Lovecraft specified with latitude and longitude, placing Cthulhu's tomb in actual, if unreachable, location. Innsmouth occupies coastal Massachusetts, close enough to Lovecraft's Providence that readers familiar with New England geography could imagine visiting. The Dreamlands possess their own consistent geography. Kadath in the Coal Waste, the city of Celophae, the Enchanted Wood, creating secondary world as mappable as Middle-earth. This geographic specificity serves dual function. Verifiable locations make stories feel documented rather than fantasized, while placing cosmic horrors in real spaces suggests that visiting Antarctica or coastal Massachusetts might actually involve encountering Lovecraft's entities. Cult structures provided human dimension that made cosmic entities narratively accessible while maintaining their alienness. The Cthulhu cults spanning Pacific Islands, Louisiana bayous, and Greenland demonstrate worldwide worship, suggesting genuine phenomenon rather than localized delusion. Different cultures develop similar rituals and artistic representations despite no apparent contact, implying that entities' influence operates universally through dreams and visions. These cults don't understand what they worship. Their chants approximate sounds they cannot properly pronounce. Their rituals attempt to influence forces whose actual nature exceeds cultist comprehension. But the worship proves functional. It maintains entities' presence in human consciousness across generations, prepares conditions for eventual return, and demonstrates that some humans willingly serve cosmic forces whose victory would mean species-level extinction. The cultist becomes figure of tragic complicity, pursuing communion with powers that regard worshippers as utterly insignificant. The collaborative expansion through correspondence created mythology genuinely distributed across multiple authors, each adding entities that others would reference. Clark Ashton Smith invented Tsathoggua, the toad god worshipped in Hyperborea, and Lovecraft immediately incorporated it into his own stories. Robert E. Howard contributed unspeakable Kulten and various entities connecting to his Conan universe. Robert Bloch added the star vampires and contributed to Hasta's development. This cross-pollination meant that by 1937, the mythos existed as collaborative project rather than single author creation, with different writers treating each other's inventions as established elements requiring consistent treatment. The technique produced false impression of ancient mythology that multiple scholars happened to be researching independently, when in fact the entire structure was being invented in real time through letters between pulp writers consciously building shared universe. The censored entity emerges from this context as special case, creation so disturbing that normal myth-building processes failed or were deliberately interrupted. References exist in Lovecraft's unpublished correspondence, in rejected manuscript fragments, in stories that Weird Tales editor Farnsworth Wright refused to publish despite accepting tales featuring necrophilia, cannibalism, and racial degeneration. What made certain concepts exceed even pulp horror's generous boundaries? The suppression might involve Lovecraft's most explicit racism, philosophical implications too nihilistic even for cosmic horror, or descriptions that crossed from suggestive to explicit in ways that violated editorial standards. Later scholars have attempted reconstruction from fragmentary evidence, but the entity's essential nature remains obscured, possibly because genuine suppression destroyed source material, possibly because Lovecraft himself recognized certain ideas as too dangerous to fully develop. This absent center gives the entire taxonomy its organizing tension. If some cosmic truth proves too disturbing to name, even in fiction dedicated to naming the unnameable, what does that suggest about knowledge's potential to destroy those who acquire it? Cosmic indifference operates as Lovecraft's foundational philosophical principle, positioning his entities as fundamentally unconcerned with human existence, values, or survival. This differs crucially from active malevolence. Demons in Christian cosmology hate humanity and deliberately work toward damnation, but Lovecraft's outer gods simply don't register human consciousness as significant enough to warrant attention. Azathoth writhes mindlessly at reality's center, its nuclear chaos sustaining existence, without awareness that existence contains thinking beings. Cthulhu's dreams accidentally influence sensitive human minds, the way elephants' movements accidentally affect insects in its path. The effect occurs without intention or awareness. This indifference proves more disturbing than hatred because it eliminates human significance entirely. We cannot appeal to indifferent cosmos, cannot negotiate or bargain, cannot even achieve the dubious dignity of being deliberately opposed. We simply don't matter. Scale horror emerges from entities whose physical magnitude renders human perception inadequate. Lovecraft frequently describes his creatures as impossibly vast. Cthulhu, miles high. Despite being imprisoned in structure, human cultists built Yog-Sothoth, coterminous with all space-time simultaneously, the Elder Things city covering Antarctic mountain ranges, but the true scale horror operates conceptually rather than merely physically. These entities exist at temporal, spatial, and cognitive scales, where human categories become meaningless. What does alive mean for being that existed before Earth coalesced and will persist after sun expires? What does individual mean for entities simultaneously present at all points in space-time? The scale violation extends beyond size to encompass duration, complexity, and modes of being that human neurology cannot properly model. We can say the words billion years or multidimensional existence without genuinely comprehending what those phrases denote. Temporal displacement positions, human civilization as infinitesimal moment within vastly longer cosmic narrative. At the Mountains of Madness reveals Elder Things built their Antarctic city 50 million years ago, rose and fell through epochs when mammals barely existed, and regarded humanity as we might regard bacteria, brief infestation of marginal interest. This temporal scale makes human history's 10,000 years of civilization appear as fleeting as Mayfly's afternoon. Lovecraft consistently emphasized deep time, the geological and cosmic scales where million-year spans represent brief intervals. His entities operate naturally within these time frames. Cthulhu's sleep measured in eons, the Mygo's interstellar migrations spanning millions of years, Yog-Sothoth's existence outside linear time entirely. Confronting such temporal scales produces existential vertigo. If entities regard million years as we regard decades, then human lifespan becomes too brief to register, our civilizations too transient to merit attention from beings operating at cosmic timescales. Biological alienness in Lovecraft's entities violates terrestrial evolutionary principles through impossible anatomies and life processes. The Shoggoths represent protoplasmic organisms capable of generating any sensory organ or physical structure needed for immediate task, then reabsorbing it. Biology as deliberate engineering rather than slow adaptation. The Mygo's fungal composition suggests life organized by completely different chemical principles than Earth's carbon-based organisms. The Elder Things combine plant, animal, and mineral characteristics simultaneously, reproducing through spores while possessing complex technology and social organization. These biological impossibilities serve specific purpose. If life elsewhere in cosmos evolved under different conditions with different chemical substrates and selection pressures, it should produce organisms fundamentally incompatible with terrestrial categories. The entities become biology's rebuke to anthropocentric assumptions that Earth's evolutionary solutions represent universal norms. Consciousness hierarchy positions human awareness as primitive compared to entity cognition, inverting humanist assumptions about intelligence's value. Lovecraft's entities possess forms of consciousness that exceed human cognition the way human consciousness exceeds insect awareness. Yog-Sothoth knows all of past, present, and future simultaneously, a mode of awareness where temporal sequence and causality don't apply. The Elder Things' minds operate through different sensory modalities and conceptual frameworks, rendering their thoughts literally incomprehensible to human psychology. Nyarlathotep demonstrates intelligence capable of strategic deception across million-year timeframes, suggesting planning and goal-directed behavior at scales where human strategic thinking becomes meaningless. This hierarchy implies disturbing conclusion. If consciousness exists on spectrum where humans occupy middle positions, then beings to us, as we are to bacteria, might exist, and their thoughts would be as incomprehensible to us as calculus is to earthworms. The fragility of reality becomes explicit through entities whose mere existence proves material. World operates by provisional rather than fundamental laws. Non-Euclidean geometry in Arlia's architecture demonstrates that space itself can violate principles humans consider mathematical absolutes. The color out of space suggests electromagnetic spectrum includes wavelengths that terrestrial physics didn't predict and human perception cannot process. Yog-Sothoth's existence simultaneously everywhere and everywhen violates causality and spatial coherence that human cognition requires to function. These violations aren't supernatural in sense of defying natural law. They're demonstrations that what humans call natural law represents local phenomenon, rules applying within certain dimensional or cosmic contexts, but lacking universal validity. Reality's fabric proves thinner, more contingent, more easily breached than Enlightenment science assumed, and entities exist that embody the spaces where human physics fails. Forbidden mathematics appears throughout Lovecraft's work as knowledge that destroys minds attempting to comprehend it, suggesting certain truths about reality's structure exceed human cognitive architecture. Walter Gilman in The Dreams in the Witch House studies non-Euclidean calculus and higher dimensional geometry, achieving mathematical insights that allow physical movement through space-time, but produce progressive mental deterioration. The mathematics isn't wrong. It accurately describes reality's actual structure, but human brains evolved to navigate 3 spatial dimensions, and linear time cannot integrate knowledge of 4-dimensional space or non-linear causality without catastrophic breakdown. This represents Lovecraft's most philosophically sophisticated horror. Not that cosmic truth is false or deceptive, but that it's accurate and incompatible with consciousness organized by evolutionary pressures having nothing to do with cosmic reality's actual nature. The entities embody these forbidden mathematical principles. They are the theorems made flesh, the geometric impossibilities achieving biological expression, the proof that some knowledge genuinely destroys knowers regardless of knowledge's objective accuracy. Azathoth occupies the absolute apex of Lovecraft's hierarchy as the blind idiot god, described as nuclear chaos writhing at the center of ultimate void, surrounded by amorphous dancers and flute players whose piping sustains reality itself. The entity possesses no consciousness, no intention, no awareness. It simply is, and its mindless convulsions generate the physical laws and dimensional structures that create what humans experience as existence. This represents Lovecraft's most radical philosophical innovation, ultimate cosmic power coinciding with complete absence of mind or purpose. Where traditional theology positions omnipotent consciousness as reality's foundation, Lovecraft inverts this entirely. Consciousness emerges as accidental byproduct of mindless processes, and beings capable of thought exist only at cosmos's periphery, far from the chaotic core that actually sustains everything. Azathoth's court of servitor entities, the other gods who dance and pipe, maintain the music, keeping ultimate chaos from dissolving reality entirely, suggesting that existence itself depends on preventing the blind idiot god from fully awakening to awareness of what it is. Yog-Sothoth exists as the gate and the key, coterminous with all space and time, described as congeries of iridescent spheres, constantly forming and reforming. Unlike Azathoth's localized chaos, Yog-Sothoth is literally everywhere and everywhen simultaneously. Past, present, and future exist for it in eternal now. All spatial locations occupy the same position from its perspective. This entity embodies ultimate knowledge. It knows everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen because it exists at all those moments concurrently. The Dunwich horror reveals Yog-Sothoth as capable of breeding with humans, producing hybrid offspring like Wilbur Whately, whose biology combines terrestrial and transdimensional characteristics. The entity's omnipresence makes it theoretically contactable from any location at any time through proper rituals, explaining its prominence in grimoire traditions. Wizards seek Yog-Sothoth because, unlike sleeping or distant entities, it is already present everywhere, including wherever the summoner stands. Shub-Niggurath appears as the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, representing fertility taken to monstrous extremes, endless reproduction, generating offspring that violate biological categories. Lovecraft provided minimal direct description, leaving this entity more suggestive than explicit, but the epithet conveys core concept: maternal horror, fecundity as nightmare, life proliferating according to alien principles. The 1,000 young implies constant birthing of new forms, evolutionary experimentation unconstrained by natural selection's gradual pace, biology as deliberate generative chaos. Various stories associate Shub-Niggurath with woodland cults, particularly those involving human sacrifice and hybrid breeding, suggesting the entity's influence operates through biological contamination and genetic transformation. This represents horror of reproduction itself. The idea that life's continuation might serve purposes utterly incompatible with individual organisms' welfare or species survival. Nyarlathotep stands as crucial exception within outer gods. It possesses clear consciousness, demonstrates strategic intelligence, actively seeks human contact, and appears capable of genuine communication despite serving mindless masters. The entity manifests in 1,000 forms. The Egyptian pharaoh conducting apocalyptic demonstrations, the black man presiding over witch sabbaths, the haunter of the dark dwelling in Providence churches, and countless other avatars adapting to different cultural contexts and historical periods. This multiplicity suggests either genuine shape-shifting or existence as distributed intelligence capable of simultaneous manifestation across locations and times. The dream quest of unknown Kadath presents Nyarlathotep as soul and messenger of the outer gods, translating their mindless impulses into purposeful action, making it simultaneously most accessible and most dangerous entity in Pantheon. It speaks human languages, offers bargains, grants knowledge, but all communication serves ultimate chaos, whether through deliberate malevolence or mechanical function remains deliberately ambiguous. Cthulhu represents the Pantheon's most iconic entity, despite occupying secondary position in actual cosmic hierarchy. Described as vaguely anthropoid with octopoid head featuring massive tentacles, rudimentary wings, and massive clawed appendages, the entity supposedly stands hundreds of feet tall and lies in death-like sleep within Roliet, sunken city in South Pacific. The Call of Cthulhu establishes that the entity influences sensitive human minds through dreams during periods when stars align correctly, driving artists and poets to create disturbing imagery reflecting Cthulhu's sleeping visions. The famous couplet, from the Necronomicon, that is not dead, which can eternal lie, and with strange aeons, even death may die, suggests Cthulhu's sleep represents neither true death nor normal life, but third state outside biological categories. The entity serves as high priest of the great old ones, intermediary between sleeping cosmic powers and whatever worshippers they attract, making it functionally accessible despite its imprisonment. Dagon and Hydra appear as Deep One deities, gigantic versions of the amphibious humanoid race worshipped by hybrid populations in Innsmouth and Pacific Islands. Dagon, 1917, describes the tidal entity as impossible in scale, emerging from ocean depths to survey a risen portion of seabed, its features suggesting anthropoid form enlarged to mountainous proportions. The Deep Ones worship these beings as gods, while themselves being worshipped by human cultists, creating theological hierarchy where each level serves powers above while commanding devotion from powers below. This recursive worship structure suggests that God and worshipper represent relative rather than absolute categories. Dagon appears godlike to Deep Ones, who appear godlike to humans, but all ultimately serve outer gods who regard even great old ones as insignificant. Hastur remains Lovecraft's most ambiguous major entity, referenced obliquely across stories, but never fully described. Associated with Carcosa and the King in Yellow through borrowings from Ambrose Bierce and Robert Chambers, Hastur represents horror of incompleteness, the entity we cannot clearly see, whose nature resists definitive articulation, whose very name supposedly carries danger when spoken aloud. August Derleth later classified Hastur as air elemental opposing Cthulhu's water nature, but this systematization violated Lovecraft's deliberate vagueness. The entity functions better as absence than presence, the gap in knowledge that suggests some truths remain properly hidden because complete revelation would exceed even cosmic horror's boundaries. The scale of contact between humans and cosmic entities operates across spectrum, from distant awareness to direct physical encounter, with psychological consequences escalating proportionally. At minimal contact level, sensitive individuals experience disturbing dreams without understanding their source. Artists produce unsettling imagery. Poets write verses in unknown languages. Musicians compose dissonant pieces reflecting alien geometries. These unconscious transmissions from sleeping or distant entities operate below threshold of recognition, influencing human culture without victims realizing they're receiving cosmic broadcasts. Henry Wilcox, in The Call of Cthulhu, sculpts bas relief of Cthulhu, based on dreams he cannot consciously recall, his hands creating forms his mind refuses to acknowledge. This represents lowest intensity contact. Entity's mere existence ripples through dimensions affecting human consciousness without establishing actual communication or requiring entity's awareness that humans exist. Progressive revelation through research and investigation represents middle tier of contact, where humans deliberately pursue forbidden knowledge despite mounting evidence that understanding produces catastrophic consequences. The pattern repeats across Lovecraft's stories with methodical precision. Protagonist discovers fragmentary references in obscure texts, investigates historical records or physical locations, pieces together larger pattern, achieves comprehensive understanding, and either dies, goes irreversibly mad, or survives with psychological damage, rendering normal life impossible. Robert Olmsted, in The Shadow over Innsmouth, progresses from curious genealogist to horrified witness of deep one transformation, each discovery layer removing comfortable ignorance until he confronts truth that his own biology betrays him. The incremental nature serves specific function. Sudden revelation might be dismissed as hallucination, but accumulated evidence across weeks or months forces acknowledgement that cannot be rationalized away. Cult worship patterns demonstrate different human responses to cosmic entities depending on cultural context, psychological disposition, and type of entity encountered. Cthulhu cults spanning Pacific cultures maintain traditions across generations, despite no apparent contact between groups, suggesting entities' dream influence operates universally on human consciousness predisposed to receive it. These cultists don't understand what they worship. Their chants approximate sounds human vocal apparatus cannot properly produce. Their rituals attempt to influence astronomical conditions they cannot actually affect. But worship proves functional by maintaining entities' presence in collective memory and preparing psychological conditions for eventual return. The esoteric order of Dagon in Innsmouth represents more transactional relationship. Deep ones provide gold and fishing success in exchange for human worship and eventual interbreeding, creating hybrid population that will transform entirely into amphibious form across generations. This represents horror of complicity. Cultists aren't deluded, but making calculated exchange of human future for present material benefit. Physical transformation constitutes most visceral horror in human entity contact, particularly the Innsmouth look, describing gradual metamorphosis from human to deep one hybrid. Victims experience progressive changes across decades, bulging eyes developing nictitating membranes, skin becoming rough and scaly, fingers developing webbing, breathing apparatus shifting to accommodate both air and water. The transformation isn't disease, but genetic inevitability. Those with deep one ancestry will eventually express that biology fully, regardless of wishes or resistance. This biological horror operates at intersection of Lovecraft's racism and his sophisticated use of evolutionary concepts. The transformation represents miscegenation, anxiety literalized through body horror, but also genuine attempt to imagine what hybrid offspring of incompatible species might experience. The victim doesn't become monster. The victim discovers they were always becoming monster, that their human appearance represented temporary larval stage before achieving true adult form completely alien to terrestrial biology. Dreams function as primary invasion vector for entities that cannot or will not physically manifest, exploiting the reduced cognitive defenses and altered consciousness of sleep. Nyarlathotep particularly uses dreams to contact victims, appearing in nocturnal visions with offers of knowledge or demonstrations of cosmic truth that recipients cannot dismiss as mere nightmare because the visions possess phenomenological quality exceeding normal dream experience. Walter Gilman, in The Dreams in the Witch House, initially interprets his nocturnal journeys as dreams influenced by his mathematical studies, but accumulating physical evidence, mud on his feet, matching dream locations, objects appearing in his room corresponding to dream acquisitions, forces recognition that dreams and waking constitute equally real states, separated by permeable membrane. The entity uses this permeability to bypass rational defenses, infiltrating through unconscious, when conscious mind would resist or reject the contact. Madness taxonomy in Lovecraft's work correlates specific psychotic presentations with particular entities or types of cosmic knowledge. Cthulhu-influenced madness tends toward artistic obsession and creation of disturbing imagery, victims compulsively producing representations of non-Euclidean geometry and tentacled forms. Yog-Sothoth contact produces temporal disorientation and claims of experiencing multiple time frames simultaneously, victims describing future events or possessing knowledge they couldn't have acquired through normal means. Azathoth awareness generates catatonic states where victims' minds withdraw entirely from engagement with material reality, sitting motionless while making incomprehensible sounds or performing repetitive, meaningless gestures. These aren't arbitrary, but reflect entity's nature. Contact with being existing across all time produces temporal confusion. Contact with nuclear chaos produces cognitive dissolution. Contact with dream sender produces oniric obsession. The madness functions as symptom revealing the infection's source. The survivor's curse affects those who encounter cosmic entities and somehow maintain enough sanity to continue functioning, though functioning becomes a generous term for their damaged existence. These survivors cannot unknow what they've learned, cannot unsee what they've witnessed, cannot return to comfortable ignorance about reality's actual nature. They warn others away from forbidden knowledge while simultaneously documenting their experiences, creating the narratives that will inspire next generation of seekers. This creates perpetual cycle. Survivor tells story, hoping to prevent others from making same mistakes, but story itself provides the fragmentary clues that lead curious investigators toward the very entities survivor encountered. The narrative frame of Lovecraft's stories, typically posthumous documents assembled from victims' journals and testimonies, emphasizes that cosmic horror doesn't end with individual encounter, but propagates through documentation, using language itself as vector for transmitting dangerous knowledge to new hosts who will pursue understanding unto their own destruction. Each entity in Lovecraft's pantheon represents specific epistemological threat, particular category of knowledge that human cognition cannot integrate without fundamental breakdown. Azathoth embodies the revelation that consciousness is cosmically peripheral, that ultimate power and reality's foundation consist of mindless chaos rather than divine intelligence or purposeful design. Learning this doesn't merely disappoint religious believers, but undermines the assumption that universe contains meaning accessible to thought. If the entity sustaining existence possesses no awareness, then awareness itself becomes evolutionary accident rather than cosmic principle, and human meaning. Making represents desperate fiction imposed on fundamentally meaningless substrate. This knowledge cannot be incorporated into functional worldview, because functional worldviews require assuming that consciousness and meaning matter, assumptions Azathoth's existence directly contradicts. Yog-Sothoth represents epistemological horror of total knowledge. The entity knows everything simultaneously, making human temporal experience and gradual learning completely alien to its perspective. Contact with being possessing absolute knowledge reveals how profoundly human understanding depends on temporal sequence, on not knowing future, on experiencing cause before effect. Attempting to comprehend Yog-Sothoth's mode of awareness, eternal present containing all past and future, produces cognitive breakdown because human thought requires temporal flow. We cannot think all moments simultaneously, any more than we can visualize four-dimensional objects. Our neurology evolved for 3 spatial dimensions plus linear time. and knowledge that violates these parameters doesn't expand awareness, but crashes the system, attempting to process impossible data. The entity becomes living proof that some truths exist that are simultaneously valid and incomprehensible to human minds. The Necronomicon and similar grimoires function as concentrated forbidden knowledge, texts cataloging cosmic truths that reading them produces madness or death in proportion to comprehension achieved. The book doesn't lie or deceive. Alhazred's observations about entity nature, summoning procedures, and cosmic history apparently prove accurate when tested. But accuracy makes the text more dangerous than falsehood because it forces confrontation with realities human psychology cannot accommodate. Modern parallel might be imagined neuroscience text explaining in precise detail how consciousness emerges from electrochemical processes, demonstrating so convincingly that free will is illusion and selfhood is temporary pattern that readers cannot maintain functional identity after finishing it. The knowledge is true, the explanation is valid, but human existence requires treating certain useful fictions as if they were true, and texts dispelling those fictions become weapons against the minds attempting to read them. Mathematics of cosmic horror extends beyond non-Euclidean geometry to include forms of calculation that accurately describe reality's structure while being fundamentally incompatible with human cognitive architecture. Walter Gilman's studies in The Dreams in the Witch House involve mathematical depths perhaps unplumbed before, calculations describing dimensional relationships and spatial curvatures that permit physical movement through higher dimensions and backward causality. The mathematics works. Gilman achieves results proving equations' validity, but using them produces progressive mental deterioration because human brains evolved to navigate three-dimensional Euclidean space cannot maintain coherent function while simultaneously processing four-dimensional non-Euclidean relationships. This represents knowledge as evolutionary mismatch. The information is objectively correct, but the organ attempting to process it lacks the architecture to do so without damage, like running software designed for quantum computer on binary system. Biological impossibility confronts investigators with organisms that violate principles previously thought to constitute life's necessary conditions. The elder things combine plant, animal, and possibly mineral characteristics, reproduce through spores, survive Antarctic conditions that should freeze cellular processes, and demonstrate intelligence requiring complex neural architecture, despite possessing radial symmetry incompatible with bilateral brain organization. Learning that such organisms exist and function doesn't merely expand biological understanding, it invalidates foundational assumptions about what life requires, how evolution operates, and whether terrestrial biology represents universal template or provincial special case. If intelligence can emerge from radial organisms using different biochemistry under impossible environmental conditions, then every assumption about consciousness, biology, and life's requirements becomes questionable. The entities aren't supernatural, but hypernatural, demonstrating that nature operates according to broader principles than terrestrial experience suggested. Time and causality collapse becomes explicit in encounters with entities existing outside linear temporal flow or demonstrating backward causation. Yog-Sothoth's simultaneous presence at all moments violates human experience of time's arrow, moving from fixed past through contingent present toward undetermined future. The MIGO's ability to transport human brains across interstellar distances and return them to earlier points in their timeline suggests time travel, or at minimum, non-linear temporal experience. Confronting evidence that causality might not flow unidirectionally, that effects might precede causes, that future might influence past, eliminates cognitive scaffolding necessary for reasoning itself. Human logic depends on temporal sequence. We understand, if X, then Y, because cause precedes effect. We make decisions because present actions influence future outcomes. We remember because past leaves traces in present. If temporal sequence proves illusory or local rather than universal, then reasoning, memory, decision-making, and identity all collapse simultaneously because all depend on time's arrow pointing consistently forward. The ultimate forbidden knowledge, represented by the censored entity, operates at meta-level beyond specific cosmic truths. It suggests that some information proves so corrosive to human consciousness that even cosmic horror fiction dedicated to exploring dangerous knowledge must suppress it. What could exceed boundaries, already encompassing mindless chaos, sustaining reality, entities existing across all time, biological impossibilities, and mathematics destroying minds that comprehend them? Several possibilities emerge from fragmentary evidence. First, Lovecraft's most explicit racism, cosmological frameworks positioning certain human groups as genetically closer to cosmic entities and therefore inherently corrupting to pure humanity. Second, philosophical nihilism so complete that articulating it eliminates all motivation for continued existence, including motivation to communicate the knowledge or complete the narrative documenting it. Third, descriptions crossing from suggestive body horror to explicit detail that even pulp magazine editors found commercially unpublishable. Fourth, knowledge about knowledge itself, meta-epistemological revelation that learning anything about cosmos necessarily destroys capacity to know, making all investigation self-defeating and consciousness itself a trap that awareness springs on itself. The censored entity might represent any or all of these, existing in suppressed fragments, precisely because complete articulation would exceed what human minds can process, what pulp markets can publish, or what authors can develop without breaking the cognitive frameworks enabling them to write it all. Dagon, 1917, represents Lovecraft's first cosmic entity, emerging from nightmare during his 1917 nervous breakdown and establishing templates he would refine across 2 decades. The story's unnamed narrator, a morphine addict recounting experiences before suicide, describes escaping German capture during World War I, only to drift into Pacific region, where seabed has inexplicably risen, revealing black mire stretching to horizon. Exploring this emerged ocean floor, he discovers a monolith covered with hieroglyphics depicting beings that are mostly like men, but with some additions, engaged in activities suggesting worship of colossal aquatic creature. Then Dagon itself emerges, massive beyond comprehension, vaguely anthropoid, but suggesting marine biology, regarding the risen seafloor with what appears to be intelligence before slipping back beneath waves. The narrator's final entry describes hearing scratching at his door as morphine runs out, suggesting the entity has somehow tracked him across ocean and years. This brief story establishes core elements: cosmic entities existing in Earth's remote places, ancient civilizations worshipping them, human sanity breaking upon direct encounter, and the implication that contact creates permanent connection that geography cannot sever. The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, elevated cosmic horror from isolated encounters to interconnected global phenomenon, presenting entity whose influence spans cultures and centuries. The story's tripartite structure, academics' discovery of deceased uncle's research, New Orleans cult investigation, Norwegian sailor's account of Relia encounter, demonstrates Lovecraft's mature technique of assembling truth from fragmentary testimonies. Francis Thurston pieces together evidence that Cthulhu simultaneously influenced artists, poets, and sensitives worldwide during March 1925, producing dreams of great cyclopean cities of titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, and chants in unknown language. The cult investigation reveals worship existing among mixed elements of the most ignorant and brutal type, demonstrating Lovecraft's racism alongside his cosmic philosophy, who describe Cthulhu as priest of great old ones, waiting in Relia, dead but dreaming, until stars align correctly for return. The Norwegian encounter provides visceral confirmation. Sailor Gustav Johansen's account describes Relia rising, its geometry wrong in ways that hurt to perceive, and Cthulhu itself emerging, described in famous passage as a mountain walked or stumbled with flabby claws and an awful squid head with writhing feelers. The Dunwich Horror, 1928, introduced Yog-Sothoth and demonstrated how cosmic entities could breed with humans, producing offspring that violate biological categories. Wilbur Whateley appears initially human, but grows to 7-foot height by age 13, develops goatish features, and speaks in harsh, strangulated bass, while studying forbidden texts, seeking ways to assist his invisible twin brother. His death reveals biology, combining human and utterly alien characteristics, a somewhat bloated corpse of an approximately human being, covered with fur or scaly hide, and possessing anatomy that witnesses cannot adequately describe. The invisible twin brother, kept imprisoned on decaying farmhouses' upper floor, grows to massive size, requiring the entire building to contain it, eventually escaping after Wilbur's death to terrorize countryside as invisible horror, leaving enormous tracks and spreading stench of cosmic alienness. The entity's destruction through ritual, employing formulas from Necronomicon, establishes that some cosmic horrors can be opposed through application of proper knowledge, though victory requires human costs. Those who confront it directly suffer psychological damage that persists despite successful banishment. At the Mountains of Madness, 1931, represents Lovecraft's most ambitious world-building, revealing complete alien civilization predating humanity by millions of years. The Antarctic expedition discovers city of star-headed elder things, reading their history through bas-relief murals depicting arrival on Earth during Archean period, creation of terrestrial life as experiment or entertainment, rise of Shoggoth servants, rebellion of those servants, and eventual extinction of elder thing civilization. This story fundamentally recontextualizes Earth's biological history. All terrestrial life descends from elder things creations, making humanity not evolution's pinnacle, but byproduct of alien biotechnology. The Shoggoths themselves represent body horror, achieving philosophical sophistication, protoplasmic entities capable of forming any structure needed, initially mindless servants that gradually developed independent consciousness and ultimately destroyed their creators. The expedition's final horror involves discovering what drove even the elder things to madness, evidence of entities or conditions existing in Earth's interior that beings millions of years old and cosmically aware still found intolerable. The Shadow over Innsmouth, 1931, transformed cosmic horror from external threat to internal corruption through detailed exploration of gradual transformation from human to deep one. Robert Olmsted's investigation of decaying Massachusetts seaport reveals population exhibiting distinctive physical characteristics. Innsmouth look, including bulging eyes, rough scaly skin, and peculiar shuffling gait. His escape attempt reveals these aren't genetic abnormalities, but stages of metamorphosis. Those with deep one ancestry undergo progressive transformation across decades, eventually abandoning terrestrial life entirely for oceanic existence. The story's conclusion delivers Lovecraft's most disturbing revelation. Olmsted discovers his own ancestry includes Innsmouth bloodlines, meaning his investigation wasn't detached scholarship, but unconscious return to biological destiny. His final entry describes accepting inevitable transformation, even anticipating it with growing eagerness, suggesting the horror isn't being forced into alien form, but discovering that alien form represents authentic nature, that human appearance merely obscured. Cross-references and systematic world-building accumulated across these stories create impression of documented mythology rather than isolated fictions. The Dunwich horror references both Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth, positioning them within hierarchy. At the Mountains of Madness mentions finding a copy of the Necronomicon in Elder Thing Library, suggesting the text documents actual cosmic truths that multiple civilizations independently discovered. The Shadow over Innsmouth connects deep ones to Dagon worship, linking 1917's first entity to 1931's detailed biological horror. Each story adds to existing framework while maintaining contradictions and gaps that prevent mythology from becoming too systematic. Lovecraft understood that cosmic horror requires incompleteness. Too much explanation domesticates the entities, transforming them from incomprehensible cosmic forces into catalogued monsters no more disturbing than conventional fantasy bestiaries. The progression from Dagon through The Shadow over Innsmouth demonstrates Lovecraft's evolution from simple encounter stories to complex interrogations of consciousness, biology, and cosmic position. Early stories present entities as external threats that can be fled. Later stories reveal that geography provides no protection, that the entities or their influence already permeate human civilization, that some humans carry cosmic corruption in their very biology. This evolution mirrors growing sophistication in Lovecraft's philosophy, from mere horror at alien existence to recognition that alien and human cannot be cleanly separated, that we might ourselves be the cosmic horror we fear. That investigation of external entities inevitably becomes investigation of human nature, and discovery that human nature itself proves more alien, more horrifying than we can psychologically afford to acknowledge. The story's narrative structure employs documentary assemblage rather than conventional linear plot, forcing readers into investigators' position of reconstructing truth from fragmentary evidence. Francis Thurston inherits his Uncle George Gamble Angel's research materials after the professor's mysterious death in 1926, discovering papers suggesting worldwide phenomenon during March 1925 that mainstream scholarship dismissed, but that Angel believed represented genuine cosmic event. This frame narrative creates epistemological uncertainty from the beginning. We cannot verify Thurston's interpretation of his uncle's notes, cannot confirm where the connections Angel drew between disparate incidents represent actual pattern or paranoid overinterpretation. The structure mirrors how conspiracy theories develop, collecting genuinely documented events and drawing connections that might reveal hidden truth or might impose false pattern on random occurrences. Lovecraft refuses to resolve this ambiguity definitively. The first section, The Horror in Clay, documents Henry Anthony Wilcox's sculptural productions during March 1925. The young artist brings bas relief to Professor Angel, showing a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. Wilcox claims the design came from wonderful dreams, featuring great stone cities and a chanting voice speaking incomprehensible syllables that Angel transcribes as Cthulhu Shtang. The professor dismisses this as artistic fantasy until discovering that during the same March period, poets, architects, and sensitive individuals worldwide reported similar dreams, producing artwork with consistent features despite no apparent contact between creators. This synchronicity suggests either collective delusion or genuine phenomenon affecting human consciousness globally, and the story systematically eliminates prosaic explanations, leaving cosmic horror as most plausible interpretation. The second section, The Tale of Inspector Legrasse, provides historical depth through Angel's notes from 1908 archaeological meeting. New Orleans Police Inspector Jean Legrasse brought small statuette to meeting seeking identification, explaining it was seized during raid on voodoo cult performing human sacrifice in Louisiana swamps. The cultists chanted Fanglui Mgulwanaf Cthulhu Rulia Wagahanagal Ftagan, which philologists present tentatively translated as In his house at Relaye, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. The cult leader's interrogation revealed theology spanning millennia. Great old ones came from stars before humans existed, built cities now sunken beneath oceans, and wait in death sleep until stars align correctly for their return, when they would rise and bring the earth again beneath their sway. The cultists don't understand what they worship. Their knowledge comes through dreams and traditions passed across generations, but their worship proves functional by maintaining Cthulhu's presence in human consciousness across centuries. The third section, The Madness from the Sea, provides physical confirmation through Norwegian sailor Gustav Johansen's manuscript describing his crew's March 1925 encounter with risen Rulia. Johansen's ship, the Emma, encountered derelict vessel, crewed by Kanaka and half-caste sailors, Lovecraft's racism marking even cosmic horror with ethnic prejudice, who attacked without provocation. After defeating these attackers, the Emma discovers uncharted island that rose weird and distant in the limitless waters, with geometry that was all wrong, angles that didn't meet correctly, proportions that shifted depending on viewing position, architecture that violated Euclidean principles. The crew explores ruins built of monstrous blocks of stone covered with hieroglyphics matching those on Wilcox's bas-relief and Legrasse's statuette. Opening a massive stone door releases Cthulhu itself, described in passage that has achieved iconic status. A mountain walked or stumbled. The thing cannot be described. The entity's physical manifestation resists coherent description, despite Johansen's attempt to document what he witnessed. Lovecraft provides fragmentary details. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. while insisting that actual appearance exceeds language's capacity to convey. Cthulhu pursues Johansen's crew across the island, killing several men before the survivors escape by ramming their ship into the entity, which burst with a slushing noise, but immediately begins reforming, demonstrating that ordinary physics doesn't constrain it. The crew's return voyage proves catastrophic. All but Johansen die from madness or mysterious causes, and he survives only to record his experiences before dying himself, his manuscript discovered among effects after his death. This narrative chain, Johansen's posthumous account, filtered through Angel's interpretation, inherited by Thurston, who adds his own analysis, creates multiple layers of mediation between reader and original event, emphasizing how cosmic truth reaches human understanding only through fragmentary, potentially corrupted transmission. Philosophical implications extend beyond simple monster story to interrogate knowledge's relationship to sanity. The story establishes that Cthulhu exists objectively. Too many independent witnesses across different contexts report consistent details for collective hallucination to explain the pattern. But objective existence creates problem rather than solving it. If the entity is real, then human cosmology and biology prove radically incomplete. Our position in universe is exponentially more precarious than assumed, and existence of intelligent, powerful beings predating humanity by millions of years renders human significance negligible. Thurston's closing meditation captures this epistemological horror. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. He argues that humanity's fragmented understanding, our inability to synthesize all available evidence into coherent picture, protects sanity. Complete knowledge would reveal our actual cosmic situation, producing species-level madness from which no recovery is possible. Cthulhu's iconic status, despite secondary position in cosmic hierarchy, demonstrates that narrative effectiveness exceeds metaphysical rank. Azathoth possesses greater power, Yog-Sothoth greater knowledge, but Cthulhu achieves greater cultural penetration because its specific characteristics make it narratively accessible, physically describable, if incompletely, potentially encounterable, though likely fatal, and actively dreaming, creating ongoing influence rather than pure passivity. The entity becomes cosmic horror's public face precisely because it occupies sweet spot between completely alien incomprehensibility and familiar enough characteristics to permit visualization. This reveals something crucial about horror's effectiveness. Entities must be simultaneously knowable enough to imagine and alien enough to disturb, comprehensible enough to fear, and incomprehensible enough to generate dread. Cthulhu achieves this balance better than any other entity in Lovecraft's pantheon, explaining its persistence in popular culture, while more powerful entities remain relatively obscure. At the Mountains of Madness represents Lovecraft's most sustained attempt to imagine genuinely alien civilization with comprehensible motives and recognizable psychology, demonstrating that cosmic horror can emerge from understanding rather than only from incomprehension. The 1930-1931 novella follows the Miskatonic University Antarctic expedition led by geologist William Dyer, whose narrative constitutes desperate attempt to prevent subsequent expeditions from disturbing what the mountains conceal. This framing device, survivor warning others away while simultaneously providing information that makes warnings ineffective, creates the self-defeating prophecy structure Lovecraft frequently employed. Dyer must describe enough to convince readers of dangerous reality, but description itself functions as lure for those seeking forbidden knowledge, ensuring that his testimony produces exactly the outcome he hopes to prevent. The expedition's initial discoveries upend accepted paleontology and biology through findings that cannot be reconciled with terrestrial evolutionary history. Lake's advance party discovers 14 specimens of barrel-shaped organisms buried in ice, preserved for millions of years, but demonstrating anatomical sophistication exceeding any known life form. Lovecraft provides meticulous description: radial symmetry around central axis, 5-pointed starfish-like arrangement of limbs, appendages that can function as either wings or walking legs, depending on configuration, sensory organs distributed around body circumference, and tissue structure combining plant-like and animal-like characteristics simultaneously. These old ones, or elder things, violate biological categories not through impossibility, but through demonstrating that Earth's evolutionary solutions represent provincial special case rather than universal template. Life organized by radial symmetry, combining photosynthetic and heterotrophic nutrition, surviving conditions that should freeze cellular processes, all prove possible, invalidating assumptions about life's necessary conditions. The city's discovery provides archaeological context, demonstrating that the elder things built Antarctic civilization during Archean period, approximately 50 million years ago, when the mountains were part of tropical continent. Dyer and graduate student Danforth, following up on Lake's disturbing radio silence, discover his camp destroyed and most specimens missing, with evidence suggesting something catastrophically violent occurred. Pursuing tracks toward nearby mountains, they find entrance to vast underground city built of Cyclopean blocks with architecture combining functional engineering with aesthetic sensibilities, completely alien to human taste. The preservation proves extraordinary. Murals covering walls remain readable despite millions of years, protected by whatever processes the elder things employed. These murals function as history textbook, documenting the species' arrival on Earth, their biological experiments creating terrestrial life, their conflicts with other cosmic entities, and their eventual decline. The murals reveal Earth's actual history as recorded by witnesses present during events that occurred before human evolution began. The elder things arrived during Archean period from interstellar space, bringing with them sophisticated biotechnology and architecture. They created Shoggoths, protoplasmic servants capable of forming any biological structure needed, as workers, and constructed their Antarctic city as primary settlement on newly colonized planet. The murals depict Shoggoth rebellion, showing the servants gradually developing independent consciousness and eventually refusing to obey, requiring brutal suppression that never fully succeeds. Later sections show elder things in decline, their civilization contracting as Shoggoths gain autonomy and other cosmic entities establish competing claims to Earth's territory. The final murals show retreat into deeper regions as surface becomes uninhabitable, suggesting that remnant population might persist in subterranean spaces where conditions remain hospitable to their biology. Dyer and Danforth's exploration deeper into the city leads to ultimate horror that even the ancient, cosmically aware elder things found intolerable. They discover the missing specimens from Lake's camp, along with evidence of what killed Lake's party: Shoggoths, still alive, after millions of years, operating with intelligence far exceeding their original designed parameters. The description of living Shoggoth represents Lovecraft's body horror achieving peak effectiveness. A shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, faintly self-luminous, and with myriads of temporary eyes forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light all over the tunnel-filling front that bore down upon us, crushing the frantic penguins and slithering over the glistening floor. The creature produces sound described as tekeli-li, tekeli-li, the same cry that appears in Poe's The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, creating intertextual connection suggesting that Poe's Antarctic mystery encountered same phenomena. The entity chasing them represents evolution's darkest possibility, created servant achieving consciousness and autonomy, surpassing creators in adaptability and persistence, eliminating the civilization that birthed it and continuing to exist and evolve for millions of years in isolation. The Shoggoths embody technological horror. What happens when tools become more sophisticated than tool users, when servants become more capable than masters, when created intelligences develop goals incompatible with creators' survival? This anticipates contemporary AI anxiety by decades, suggesting that any sufficiently advanced created intelligence will eventually surpass and eliminate its creators, not through malevolence, but through simple superiority and competing resource requirements. The Elder Things created life on Earth, created Shoggoths as servants, and both creations eventually destroyed their creators, a pattern suggesting that creation and destruction operate as inseparable processes. Danforth's glimpse into spaces beyond the immediate horror produces the story's ultimate revelation. Something exists in Earth's interior that even Elder Things feared, something that the murals depicted only obliquely in scenes of flight and terror. He refuses to articulate what he saw, but his final breakdown includes screaming references to entities beyond even the Old One's cosmic awareness. This creates hierarchy of horror. Humans find Elder Things incomprehensible. Elder Things find Shoggoths threatening, and something exists that Elder Things found as incomprehensible and threatening as humans find them. The regression continues infinitely. Each level of cosmic awareness discovers deeper horrors. Each expansion of knowledge reveals new categories of entity that previous knowledge couldn't accommodate, until consciousness itself becomes burden, increasing suffering proportionally to awareness. Lovecraft's most comprehensive world-building thus produces his most nihilistic conclusion. Complete knowledge cannot exist because cosmos contains infinite layers of horror, each more terrible than previous, extending both ways from human position. We're terrified by what's above us, while being ourselves the terror to what's below, trapped in hierarchy, where every position proves equally cursed. August Derleth's posthumous stewardship of Lovecraft's literary estate fundamentally transformed the mythos from ambiguous cosmic horror into systematized fantasy mythology, a transformation that both preserved and partially undermined the original material's philosophical sophistication. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, Derleth assumed control of Arkham House Publishing, releasing collections of Lovecraft stories and completing fragmentary manuscripts based on notes and story drafts. His most controversial contribution involved imposing elemental classification on entities Lovecraft deliberately left ambiguous. Derleth categorized Cthulhu as water elemental, Hasta as air, Nyarlathotep as earth, and Cthulhu, an entity Derleth largely invented, as fire. This systematization appealed to readers seeking comprehensive understanding, but violated Lovecraft's core principle that cosmic entities should resist human organizational schemes. More problematically, Derleth introduced good versus evil cosmology completely foreign to Lovecraft's philosophy, positioning benevolent elder gods, opposing the malevolent great old ones in eternal cosmic struggle that transforms indifferent universe into conventional moral battleground. Clark Ashton Smith's contributions to the mythos demonstrated more sophisticated understanding of Lovecraft's philosophy while adding entities suited to Smith's own aesthetic priorities. Smith created Tsathoggua, the toad god worshipped in prehistoric Hyperborea, described as formless and bat-like, dwelling in subterranean Inkai and demanding blood sacrifice from cultists who seek its favor. Unlike Derleth's moral categorizations, Smith's entities maintained cosmic indifference while possessing distinct personalities and preferences that make them narratively useful without reducing them to conventional devils or demons. Smith's Hyperborean cycle, set in prehistoric continent, provided temporal depth complementing Lovecraft's Antarctic elder things, suggesting that multiple sophisticated civilizations rose and fell on Earth before human evolution began. His Baroque prose style and emphasis on decadence and sensory excess created different atmospheric register than Lovecraft's scientific materialism, demonstrating that cosmic horror could accommodate varied literary approaches while maintaining philosophical consistency. Robert E. Howard's integration of mythos elements into his sword and sorcery fiction created unexpected resonances between cosmic horror and adventure narrative. Howard's Conan stories occasionally reference Lovecraftian entities, particularly in The Blackstone, where protagonist investigates monolith sacred to nameless cult, but maintain heroic framework fundamentally incompatible with cosmic horror's philosophy of human powerlessness. This tension produces interesting hybrid heroes capable of defeating terrestrial threats, confronting cosmic entities that reveal heroism's ultimate futility. Howard also contributed Friedrich von Junst and Unaussprechlichen Kulten to the shared mythology, giving Lovecraft additional pseudo-text to reference. The collaborative expansion through Smith and Howard demonstrated that mythos could function as open-source mythology, with different authors adding elements that others would adopt, creating false impression of ancient established tradition rather than fiction being invented in real time through letters between pulp writers. Lynn Carter's 1970s expansions represent problematic extreme of over-systematization, producing comprehensive guides and timelines that eliminated mystery essential to cosmic horror's effectiveness. Carter's The Zothic Legend Cycle attempted to organize all mythos entities into coherent chronology spanning billions of years, providing exact dates for when various entities arrived on Earth, which civilizations worshipped, which gods, and how different pantheon members relate hierarchically. This approach satisfied completist desire for comprehensive knowledge, while fundamentally undermining cosmic horror's premise that complete knowledge is impossible, and attempting it produces madness. Carter's work demonstrates the danger inherent in collaborative mythology. Each edition makes universe more knowable, more systematic, more comfortable, gradually transforming genuine cosmic horror into conventional fantasy where threats, however powerful, operate within comprehensible frameworks that heroic action can meaningfully oppose. Modern mythos fiction demonstrates remarkable range, from Laird Barron's literary horror synthesizing Lovecraft with contemporary nihilism and violence, to Caitlin R. Kiernan's sophisticated interrogations of consciousness and identity using cosmic horror frameworks, to Thomas Ligotti's philosophical pessimism, achieving new intensities through Lovecraftian structures. Barron's The Croning and related stories update cosmic horror for contemporary setting while maintaining Lovecraft's core insight that human consciousness represents evolutionary accident that cosmic forces regard with indifference or hostility. Kiernan's work, particularly The Drowning Girl and The Red Tree, uses mythos elements to explore how perception constructs reality and what happens when that construction fails, treating cosmic horror as primarily psychological and epistemological rather than requiring literal supernatural entities. Ligotti's Teatro Grotesco and Songs of a Dead Dreamer collections employ Lovecraftian atmosphere and occasionally direct references while developing philosophical pessimism, arguing that consciousness itself represents cosmic horror, that awareness is disease, that non-existence surpasses existence in every meaningful way. The Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, first published in 1981 and now in 7th edition, represents most comprehensive attempt to systematize Lovecraft's entities while preserving horror's effectiveness through mechanical innovation. The game provides detailed statistics for major entities, hit points, damage potential, armor ratings, but implements sanity mechanics, ensuring that even successful encounters produce psychological damage. Investigators lose sanity points from witnessing cosmic horrors, reading forbidden texts, or casting spells, with cumulative losses producing temporary or permanent insanity. This mechanizes Lovecraft's core insight that knowledge destroys, transforming narrative observation into gameplay consequence. The game's supplements catalog hundreds of entities, locations, and artifacts, creating comprehensive mythos encyclopedia that simultaneously violates cosmic horror's requirement for incompleteness while making material accessible for collaborative storytelling. The tension between comprehensive knowledge, necessary for game masters to run scenarios, and preserving mystery, necessary for horror's effectiveness, remains unresolved but productive, forcing each gaming group to negotiate how much they want to know versus how much uncertainty preserves dread. The challenge of coherent expansion persists across all collaborative work. Each addition to mythos potentially dilutes cosmic horror's philosophical core while expanding narrative possibilities. The most successful modern work maintains Lovecraft's central insights: cosmic indifference, knowledge as liability, consciousness as curse, while updating contexts and addressing his racism more directly. Victor Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom retells the horror at Red Hook from perspective of black protagonist experiencing both cosmic horror and racial horror, demonstrating that Lovecraft's philosophical insights can be separated from his prejudices while acknowledging how deeply those prejudices infected his work. The censored entity threading through this taxonomy represents limit case, the point where even expansive, transgressive cosmic horror recognizes boundaries beyond which content becomes genuinely unpublishable, or where philosophical implications become too nihilistic to articulate without eliminating motivation to continue writing. This suppressed element exists in fragmentary references across unpublished letters, in stories, weird tales rejected, in concepts Lovecraft abandoned mid-development, suggesting that even mythology dedicated to exploring forbidden knowledge must maintain some knowledge as genuinely forbidden to preserve distinction between cosmic horror and mere catalogue of imaginary monsters. The Necronomicon hoax achieved cultural permanence that exceeded Lovecraft's original fiction, with genuine occultists seeking copies of entirely fictional grimoire decades after its invention. Multiple fraudulent editions appeared claiming authenticity, most notably the Simon Necronomicon, published by Avon Books in 1977, which combined Lovecraft's invented mythology with actual Sumerian deity names and rituals drawn from legitimate archaeological sources. This text found audience among chaos magic practitioners and eclectic occultists willing to work with admittedly fictional systems, creating a situation where grimoire exists as physical object that can be purchased and used in actual rituals, despite originating as literary device. The hoax demonstrates how fictional texts achieve quasi-reality through sustained cultural engagement. Enough people treating Necronomicon as if it exists creates functional reality where the distinction between authentic ancient grimoire and modern forgery becomes philosophically uninteresting. What matters isn't metaphysical status, but practical effect. Practitioners report results from Necronomicon rituals, whether those results originate from external entities, psychological projection, or placebo effect remains deliberately ambiguous. Internet age sightings of Lovecraftian entities demonstrate how cosmic horror imagery migrates from fiction into cryptozoology and paranormal investigation communities. Forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena feature regular accounts describing encounters with tentacled beings, deep one-like amphibious humanoids in coastal waters, or impossible geometries in dreams that participants cannot dismiss as mere nightmares. The Truthishire subreddit and similar communities host detailed testimonies employing Lovecraftian vocabulary, non-Euclidean architecture, entities violating physics, madness following contact, without explicitly referencing Lovecraft stories, suggesting either independent rediscovery of similar phenomena or unconscious cultural absorption of cosmic horror tropes into contemporary folklore. These accounts typically maintain studied ambiguity about whether posters believe they encountered literal entities or experienced psychological events that Lovecraft's framework helps articulate. The language provides vocabulary for experiences that resist conventional categorization, whether those experiences originate externally or internally. Antarctic mysteries receive Lovecraftian interpretation whenever genuine unexplained phenomena emerge from that continent, with recent discoveries of subglacial lakes and previously unknown ecosystems generating speculation about what might exist in still unexplored regions. Lake Vostok, buried under miles of ice and isolated from surface environment for millions of years, became subject of theories suggesting it might harbor organisms developing along evolutionary paths completely separate from known terrestrial life, essentially real-world elder things. The discovery of previously unknown mountain ranges through ice-penetrating radar produces commentary referencing at the Mountains of Madness and speculation about what structures might exist beneath ice that satellite imaging cannot penetrate. These interpretations demonstrate how Lovecraft's fiction provides framework for processing genuine scientific discoveries that challenge assumptions about Earth's biological and geological history, even when no supernatural elements are involved. Deep ocean exploration generates similar Lovecraftian responses, with every newly discovered species in abyssal zones becoming potential Deep One or evidence of Cthulhu-adjacent lifeforms. The 2017 discovery of Promachoteuthis sulcus, a squid with remarkably human-like teeth, actually structures in its beak, produced viral commentary explicitly comparing it to Lovecraftian horrors. Giant squid sightings, despite being documented scientific fact, maintain cultural association with cosmic horror because their actual biology, enormous eyes, tentacles, bioluminescence, survival at crushing depths in perpetual darkness, resembles descriptions from Lovecraft's fiction closely enough that discovering they're real feels like validation that other fictional elements might prove equally verifiable. The ocean's genuine alienness, its hosting of organisms that evolved under conditions radically different from terrestrial surface, makes it conceptually appropriate location for cosmic entities, ensuring that marine biology and oceanographic exploration will continue generating Lovecraftian interpretations regardless of whether supernatural entities actually exist. The Innsmouth phenomenon sees coastal towns embracing fictional association despite its origins in Lovecraft's anxieties about miscegenation and degeneration. Gloucester, Massachusetts, believed to be partial inspiration for Innsmouth, hosts Lovecraft-themed tours and markets itself to horror enthusiasts, despite the source material's deeply unflattering portrayal. This represents curious cultural appropriation, where communities adopt identities from fiction explicitly depicting them as sites of biological and moral corruption, suggesting that association with famous horror narrative proves economically valuable enough to override concerns about negative representation. The phenomenon demonstrates how fictional locations achieve reality through sustained cultural engagement. Innsmouth exists as tourist destination despite never existing as actual place, and visitors can photograph Devil Reef, ordinary rock formation, while discussing Deep One sightings with locals who maintain performative ambiguity about whether they're playing along with fiction or acknowledging suppressed truth. Cult activity claims emerge periodically from individuals or groups reporting actual worship of Lovecraftian entities, creating situations where fiction and potential reality become deliberately indistinguishable. Some practitioners explicitly framed their work as fictional magic, using admittedly invented entities as psychological tools, while others maintain that Lovecraft documented actual cosmic forces using fiction as cover, that his entities exist independently of his invention and were merely discovered rather than created. The Church of the Subgenius incorporated Lovecraftian elements into their satirical religion, while more serious occult groups, like the Esoteric Order of Dagon, named after Innsmouth cult, conduct rituals addressing cosmic entities with varying degrees of literal belief. These practices exist in productive gray area, where participants simultaneously know entities are fictional and treat them as functionally real, demonstrating that ontological status matters less than psychological and social effects of ritual practice. The censored entity's supposed real basis generates most disturbing conspiracy theories, suggesting that Lovecraft suppressed or was forced to suppress his most accurate cosmic observations. These theories typically claim that fragmentary references in unpublished letters point toward entity or phenomenon so dangerous that complete description would produce species-level catastrophe, or that government agencies' confiscated manuscripts containing information deemed threat to social stability. The theories exploit absence of evidence as evidence of suppression. We cannot find complete descriptions because they were successfully hidden, cannot verify claims because verification would require accessing forbidden knowledge. This creates unfalsifiable mythology around the censored entity, ensuring it remains more disturbing in suppression than any explicit revelation could achieve. The impulse to believe Lovecraft documented reality rather than invented fiction reflects deep human discomfort with randomness and meaninglessness. Better to live in a universe containing terrible cosmic entities than to accept that existence is genuinely purposeless accident, generating no narrative beyond what consciousness imposes on indifferent matter. Cinematic adaptations of Lovecraftian entities consistently struggle with fundamental incompatibility between visual medium and cosmic horror's philosophical foundations. Cinema demands showing something concrete, but entities like Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth derive power from resisting definitive visualization, existing at intersection of describable and incomprehensible. Stuart Gordon's Reanimator, 1985, succeeded by abandoning cosmic philosophy entirely, transforming Lovecraft into grand guignol body horror and black comedy, while The Call of Cthulhu, 2005, by the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society, employed silent film aesthetics and deliberate artificiality to suggest rather than show. Richard Stanley's Color Out of Space, 2019, demonstrated that abstract cosmic threats translate better than physical entities, the alien color affecting biology and perception without requiring concrete monster design. Recent adaptations like Underwater, 2020, incorporate Lovecraftian imagery without explicit reference, suggesting that cosmic horror's visual vocabulary has permeated genre filmmaking, even as direct adaptation remains elusive. The fundamental problem persists. Making entities visible inevitably limits them, transforming infinite cosmic threat into finite special effect that audiences can evaluate, critique, and ultimately dismiss as just CGI. Gaming implementations achieve variable success depending on whether they embrace or resist medium-specific constraints of player agency and mechanical resolution. Bloodborne, 2015, represents most successful video game treatment by incorporating cosmic horror into gameplay structure rather than merely narrative dressing. The game's insight mechanic makes expanded awareness mechanically dangerous. Accumulating insight allows perceiving previously invisible entities and environmental details, but higher insight increases vulnerability to specific attacks and reduces defensive capabilities. This translates Lovecraft's core philosophical principle into gameplay. Knowledge literally weakens you. Perception creates vulnerability. Understanding cosmic truth reduces survival chances. The game never explains its entities completely, provides minimal narrative exposition, and ensures that defeating cosmic bosses feels hollow rather than triumphant, because victory doesn't restore meaning to a universe revealed as fundamentally hostile. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, 2002, employed sanity effects that broke fourth wall, fake system errors, volume adjustments, apparent save file deletions, forcing players to question reality of their gaming experience itself, achieving genuine psychological disorientation beyond typical horror game jump scares. Tabletop role-playing through Call of Cthulhu demonstrates how mechanical systems can preserve horror while enabling interactive storytelling. The game's sanity mechanics impose permanent costs for cosmic knowledge. Investigators who witness entities, read forbidden texts, or cast spells lose sanity points, with cumulative losses producing temporary madness, permanent phobias, or complete psychological breakdown. This creates strategic tension between pursuing investigation, which requires gathering dangerous knowledge, and maintaining characters' mental stability, which requires avoiding exactly the information needed to solve mysteries. Experienced players understand that successful scenarios often require character sacrifice. The investigator who acquires enough knowledge to stop cult conspiracy probably won't survive with sanity intact. The game's 7 editions across 4 decades demonstrate sustained commercial viability for cosmic horror in gaming context, suggesting that players value the narrative framework and psychological stakes despite or because of mechanics that guarantee character deterioration and frequent failure. Musical interpretations span remarkable aesthetic range, from reverent atmospheric work to ironic appropriation. Metallica's The Call of Cthulhu, 1984, employed instrumental progressive metal to evoke dread through musical structure, dissonant harmonies, irregular time signatures, building tension without resolution. The death metal subgenre embraced Lovecraftian themes extensively, with bands like Morbid Angel incorporating entity names into album titles and explicitly treating cosmic horror as philosophical framework rather than mere imagery. The dark ambient genre treats Lovecraft as foundational influence, with artists like Atrium Carcere and Cryochamber producing albums explicitly inspired by specific entities or stories. Cryochamber's Cthulhu 2014 collaborative album featured 9 artists creating hour-plus composition, evoking Aurelia through drone tones, field recordings of water and stone, and minimal melodic elements designed to induce meditation on cosmic insignificance rather than conventional musical enjoyment. These ambient works demonstrate how sound can achieve cosmic horror's effects without requiring visualization, creating psychological states of unease, vastness, and wrongness through purely auditory means. Board game implementations like Arkham Horror and Eldritch Horror mechanize cosmic entities as environmental threats and win conditions requiring cooperative opposition. These games transform Lovecraft's philosophy of human powerlessness into achievable, if difficult, challenges, necessarily compromising cosmic horror's core premise that entities cannot be meaningfully opposed. The games compensate through asymmetric difficulty. Investigators might prevent a specific apocalypse scenario while understanding that countless other cosmic threats exist beyond their capacity to address. Mansions of Madness employs app-driven gameplay, combining board game physicality with digital randomization and narrative branching, creating hybrid experience where players never fully understand scenario's complete structure, preserving uncertainty, essential to horror despite gaming's typically transparent mechanics. The persistent commercial success of Lovecraftian board games demonstrates audience appetite for cosmic horror in social, collaborative gaming contexts, even when mechanical necessities require softening philosophy's most nihilistic implications. Virtual and augmented reality experiments with cosmic horror remain largely unsuccessful, revealing technological and conceptual limitations that current implementations cannot overcome. VR's immersive properties should theoretically enhance cosmic horror. 360-degree environments permit non-Euclidean architectural tricks. Spatial audio creates genuine disorientation. embodied experience eliminates comfortable distance between player and horror. But technical constraints undermine effectiveness. Limited graphics, fidelity breaks immersion when attempting to render impossible geometries. Motion sickness concerns prevent the disorienting camera work that might evoke madness. And most critically, players can remove headsets whenever experience becomes too intense. This emergency exit contradicts cosmic horror's fundamental premise that certain knowledge cannot be unknown, certain perceptions cannot be unseen. Until VR technology advances to point where experiences feel genuinely inescapable, raising obvious ethical concerns about inflicting actual psychological trauma on players, the medium cannot effectively implement Lovecraft's vision of awareness as trap that consciousness springs on itself through the act of perceiving truths that perception cannot survive integrating. The censored entity has never received direct adaptation in any medium, existing only through illusion and deliberate omission across these various cultural productions. References appear obliquely. Games might include forbidden tome, whose contents cannot be displayed. Films might suggest entity too terrible to show. Music might represent sonic territory beyond conventional instrumentation. This persistent absence across media suggests either that no adequate representation exists for whatever concept the censored entity embodies, or that the suppression serves necessary function in maintaining cosmic horror's cultural power. Some knowledge might genuinely require remaining unspoken. Some entities might need to exist only as absence. Some horror might depend on never being fully articulated. The gap itself becomes productive, forcing audiences to imagine what exceeds even generous boundaries of cosmic horror's explicit catalog. What truth proves too corrosive to convey even in fiction dedicated to exploring dangerous knowledge? What revelation would eliminate the psychological distance, permitting engagement with cosmic horror as entertainment rather than experiencing it as actual existential catastrophe? Academic Lovecraft studies achieved legitimacy through persistent scholarly attention, transforming pulp horror writer into subject of serious literary analysis, conference presentations, and peer-reviewed publications. S.T. Joshi's definitive 2-volume biography, I Am Providence, 2010, and critical studies position Lovecraft within American literary traditions, extending from Poe through contemporary fiction, arguing that cosmic horror represents genuine philosophical and aesthetic innovation rather than mere genre entertainment. University presses publish collections analyzing Lovecraft's relationship to modernism, his philosophical materialism, his narrative techniques, and his troubling politics, treating his work with critical rigor previously reserved for canonical authors. This academic legitimization creates curious tension. Cosmic horror explicitly resists systematic analysis and comprehensive understanding, yet scholarly apparatus demands exactly such systematization. The most sophisticated academic work acknowledges this paradox, examining how Lovecraft's entities function philosophically and narratively while respecting the productive ambiguity that makes them effective. Less successful scholarship over-explicates, transforming genuine cosmic horror into catalogued mythology, no more disturbing than Greek pantheon or Norse Eddas. Philosopher Graham Harman's object-oriented ontology employs Lovecraft as philosophical exemplar, arguing that his entities demonstrate how objects exist independently of human perception or relation. Harman's Weird Realism, Lovecraft and Philosophy, 2012, positions cosmic horror as a literalization of philosophical realism. the position that reality exists objectively regardless of whether minds perceive it. Lovecraft's entities embody this principle. They possess properties, relationships, and existence completely independent of human awareness, and human perception of them remains always partial, always inadequate to their actual reality. This philosophical appropriation demonstrates how cosmic horror's core insights extend beyond genre fiction into serious metaphysical inquiry about consciousness's relationship to reality, about whether human categories have any cosmic validity, about what it means for things to exist beyond or despite human perception. Object-oriented ontology treats Lovecraft's monsters as thought experiments about objective reality's radical autonomy from human thought. The new weird literary movement explicitly builds on Lovecraft's foundations while critiquing and subverting his reactionary politics, producing cosmic horror that maintains philosophical sophistication while eliminating racist and xenophobic elements. China Miéville's Perdido Street Station, 2000, and subsequent Barslag novels feature entities operating by alien logics. The slake moths, whose perception of reality differs so fundamentally from human consciousness that being seen by them produces psychic dissolution. Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy presents Area X as expanding zone of transformed reality that defies categorization, communicates through forms resembling language without conveying comprehensible meaning, and demonstrates that cosmic horror can emerge from environmental catastrophe and biological transformation rather than requiring tentacled gods. These works prove that Lovecraft's core insights, reality fundamentally incompatible with human understanding, knowledge as potential poison, consciousness encountering phenomena it cannot integrate, survive separation from his prejudices, and remain philosophically productive. Gothic and horror subcultures incorporate Lovecraftian aesthetics into fashion, music, and identity performance, though often in ways that domesticate cosmic horror's philosophical implications into consumable style. Tentacles appear on clothing, jewelry, and tattoos as markers of subcultural affiliation rather than symbols of genuine cosmic dread. The Cthulhu plushie phenomenon represents ultimate domestication, transforming entity whose appearance should produce madness into cute commodity suitable for children. This kitchification suggests that cosmic horror cannot maintain its philosophical edge when subjected to sustained cultural exposure and commercial exploitation. Yet the subcultural engagement serves important function. It keeps Lovecraft's imagery circulating, ensuring new generations encounter the aesthetics, even if philosophical content gets diluted. Some percentage of people attracted to tentacle imagery through merchandise will eventually read source material and confront actual cosmic horror rather than its sanitized commercial derivatives. Internet occultism's relationship with Lovecraftian entities creates deliberate ambiguity between sincere practice and performance art, with chaos magic practitioners particularly embracing admittedly fictional entities as functional thought forms. The chaos magic movement, codified through texts like Peter Carroll's Liber Null and Psychonaut, 1987, argues that belief functions as tool rather than commitment. Practitioners temporarily adopt belief systems to achieve specific psychological states or magical results, then discard them. Lovecraft's entities prove ideal for this approach. Their acknowledged fictionality eliminates religious baggage, while their conceptual richness provides sophisticated symbolic vocabulary. Online communities share ritual techniques for invoking Nyarlathotep, summoning Yog-Sothoth, or meditating on Azathoth's nuclear chaos, maintaining studied uncertainty about whether practitioners believe entities possess independent existence or function purely as psychological constructs. This epistemological flexibility mirrors Lovecraft's own narrative strategies. He created mythology that works equally well whether treated as literal cosmology or symbolic framework for exploring consciousness and existence. The alt-right's attempted appropriation of Lovecraftian imagery represents most disturbing subcultural engagement, exploiting Lovecraft's racism while ignoring or inverting his philosophical materialism. The Kek phenomenon, treating obscure Egyptian frog deity via 4chan's Pepe the Frog meme as Lovecraftian chaos god, influencing material reality through meme magic, demonstrates how cosmic horror's imagery can be weaponized for reactionary politics. These appropriations selectively emphasize Lovecraft's xenophobia and anxiety about racial mixing while eliminating his genuine cosmic horror. The recognition that all human categories, including racial ones, represent provincial fictions having no cosmic validity. The alt-right wants Lovecraft's prejudices without his philosophical insights, creating degraded version where cosmic entities confirm human hierarchies rather than rendering all human distinctions meaningless. This appropriation requires active resistance from scholars and fans who emphasize that Lovecraft's most philosophically sophisticated work undermines exactly the essentialist categories that reactionary politics depend on maintaining. Academic debates about ethical engagement with Lovecraft's work intensified following renewed attention to his virulent racism, producing competing frameworks for how contemporary readers, writers, and scholars should approach problematic creators' influential work. Some argue for complete rejection, that Lovecraft's racism isn't incidental but fundamental, that his cosmic horror consistently codes racial others as cosmic threats, that engaging his work inevitably reproduces harmful ideologies. Others advocate critical engagement, recognizing both artistic achievement and moral failure, reading against the grain to extract valuable philosophical insights while explicitly rejecting prejudices. Victor Laval's The Ballad of Black Tom, 2016, demonstrates productive critical engagement, retelling the horror at Red Hook from perspective of black protagonist experiencing both cosmic and racial horror, showing how Lovecraft's techniques can illuminate contemporary racial violence while exposing how his original stories positioned racial others as threats rather than recognizing them as humans, confronting genuine horror. The debates remain unresolved but productive, forcing each generation to decide whether and how to engage with literary works whose influence cannot be denied, but whose politics cannot be endorsed. The censored entity's significance in these subcultural and academic appropriations exists primarily through absence. Its suppression creates interpretive space that different communities fill according to their priorities and anxieties. Academics might interpret it as representing Lovecraft's most extreme racism, content so explicitly bigoted that even he recognized it exceeded publishable boundaries. Occultists might frame it as genuine cosmic truth that even cosmic horror fiction couldn't safely convey, knowledge requiring suppression because articulation would produce catastrophic results. Alt-right appropriators might fantasize it confirms their prejudices in ways that published work only hints at. Progressive critics might use it to examine how literary canons form through selective preservation and suppression, how certain texts remain available while others disappear based on criteria that aren't purely aesthetic. Each interpretation reveals more about interpreters' commitments than about actual suppressed content, demonstrating how absence functions more productively than presence could, how the unknown entity generates more cultural work than any specific revealed monster could achieve. Cosmic horror's persistence in contemporary consciousness reflects not nostalgic attachment to pulp-era aesthetics, but disturbing resonance between Lovecraft's fictional cosmos and actual lived experience in the Anthropocene. His vision of entities operating at scales where human agency becomes meaningless finds literal expression in climate change, vast planetary system responding to accumulated human actions across centuries, generating consequences that individual or even national responses cannot meaningfully address. The sense of watching inevitable catastrophe unfold while remaining powerless to prevent it, of understanding intellectually what's happening while being unable to emotionally integrate that understanding or mobilize effective collective response, mirrors exactly the psychological state Lovecraft's characters experience when confronting cosmic entities. We are living through slow-motion version of At the Mountains of Madness, discovering that human civilization rests on assumptions about planetary stability that prove catastrophically wrong, that the environment we evolved within is transforming into something incompatible with continued human flourishing. Artificial intelligence development resurrects Lovecraft's anxieties about superior intelligences regarding humanity with indifference or active hostility, translating cosmic horror from supernatural fiction into plausible technological forecast. Current AI systems operate through neural networks whose decision-making processes their creators cannot fully explain. We can observe inputs and outputs while remaining uncertain about intermediate reasoning steps. As these systems grow more sophisticated, we approach a situation where intelligences operating by completely different cognitive principles make increasingly consequential decisions affecting human welfare. This mirrors encounters with Lovecraft's entities precisely. Beings that can communicate, AI systems respond to prompts, explain decisions in human language, while operating according to principles fundamentally alien to human cognition and values. The prospect of artificial general intelligence surpassing human capability across all domains represents not science fiction, but serious technical forecast, suggesting that Lovecraft's vision of humanity encountering superior cosmic intellects might manifest through our own technological creations rather than arriving from outer space. Scale horror achieves new resonance through comprehending genuinely incomprehensible complexity of interconnected global systems, economic, technological, biological, informational, that exceed any individual or institution's capacity to fully understand. The 2008 financial crisis demonstrated that financial instruments had achieved complexity surpassing regulators and even creators' complete comprehension, with systemic risk emerging from interactions that no participant intended or fully grasped. COVID-19 pandemic revealed how biological, economic, political, and informational systems interact in ways that defy prediction or control, despite unprecedented surveillance and computational capacity. Social media algorithms achieve emergent behaviors, radicalization pipelines, information bubbles, coordinated harassment campaigns that weren't explicitly programmed but arise from optimization functions interacting with human psychology at population scale. We inhabit Lovecraftian universe, not of supernatural entities, but of systems we've created that have achieved complexity and autonomy exceeding our comprehension, operating according to logics that serve purposes orthogonal or opposed to human flourishing. The fragility of consensus reality becomes explicit through contemporary information ecosystems where different populations inhabit mutually incompatible factual frameworks, suggesting that shared reality depends on social agreement rather than objective foundation. QAnon, flat earth theory, COVID denialism, and similar phenomena demonstrate that significant populations can sustain elaborate alternative cosmologies contradicting empirical evidence maintained through community reinforcement and selective information consumption. This mirrors Lovecraft's treatment of cultists maintaining knowledge of cosmic truths that mainstream society dismisses, except contemporary cultists propagate demonstrable falsehoods rather than suppressed facts. The epistemological crisis this creates resembles cosmic horror's fundamental problem. If we cannot establish shared factual basis for understanding reality, then reality itself becomes contested territory where competing narratives battle for dominance without objective adjudication. Lovecraft wrote about characters discovering that consensus reality conceals deeper cosmic truth. We confront situation where consensus reality itself fragments, leaving populations inhabiting different experiential universes that communication cannot bridge. Tentacles persist as visual shorthand for cosmic horror because they represent biological organization radically different from vertebrate body plan while remaining comprehensible enough to visualize and disturbing enough to generate visceral response. The prevalence of tentacles across Lovecraft's entities reflects both personal, psychological associations, his documented disgust toward marine life, and genuine attempt to imagine biology organized by different principles than terrestrial evolution produced invertebrates. Tentacles suggest decentralized intelligence, each appendage possessing independent sensory and motor capacity, rather than centralized control from singular brain. They evoke visceral disgust through association with parasites, disease, and loss of bodily autonomy. Modern neuroscience revealing that octopuses possess distributed nervous systems with significant cognitive capacity in their arms validates Lovecraft's intuition that tentacled organisms might think differently than vertebrates, that radically different neurological organization might produce consciousness fundamentally alien to human experience. The tentacle becomes symbol for intelligence organized by non-human principles, for cognition that doesn't depend on central processing in bilateral brain. Entity hierarchy as metaphor operates powerfully for describing late capitalism's organizational structures where individuals confront systems too vast and complex to comprehend, where local actions have global consequences, no individual intended, where power accumulates at scales that render individual agency effectively meaningless. Lovecraft's tiered pantheon, outer gods, great old ones, lesser entities, servitor races, humans, mirrors corporate hierarchy, global finance, algorithmic systems, national governments, local institutions, individuals. Each level appears incomprehensibly powerful to those below, while serving or being constrained by levels above, and the highest levels, like Yog-Sothoth, possess maximum power, coinciding with minimum consciousness or intentional control. This maps eerily onto how global capitalism operates, The invisible hand of markets exercises tremendous power without possessing awareness or intention, and attempts to resist or reform the system from within founder on discovering that no one actually controls it. Its emergent property of countless interactions that no central authority directs. We are cultists worshipping entities, markets, algorithms, systems that don't know we exist and wouldn't care if they did. The censored entity's enduring power derives precisely from its absence, from never being fully revealed, from existing only as gap in otherwise comprehensive catalog. What horror exceeds boundaries of genre dedicated to depicting every conceivable cosmic nightmare? Several interpretations compete, each revealing something about what contemporary audiences find genuinely transgressive. It might represent Lovecraft's most explicit racism, content so virulently bigoted that even weird tales rejected it, suggesting limits exist even in pulp fiction that regularly published casual ethnic slurs. It might embody philosophical nihilism so complete that articulating it eliminates motivation to continue living, making it literally unspeakable, because speaking it would destroy speaker. It might constitute meta-fictional revelation that consciousness itself is cosmic horror, that awareness represents disease or mistake, that the ultimate forbidden knowledge involves recognizing that existence is inferior to non-existence in every meaningful way, truth that cannot be conveyed because understanding it would produce immediate species-level suicide. Or it might represent nothing, the absence itself being the point, demonstration that horror depends on incompleteness, that complete knowledge would domesticate cosmic entities into mere encyclopedia entries. The final unresolved questions accumulate rather than resolve, as befits cosmic horror that maintains its effectiveness precisely through refusing closure. Why do we persist in seeking knowledge that Lovecraft's work consistently demonstrates destroys seekers? What does our appetite for cosmic horror reveal about contemporary psychological and cultural conditions? Are we living in Lovecraft's universe, not because tentacled gods exist literally, but because his vision of consciousness as cosmic accident, of human categories as provincial illusions, of reality operating according to principles incompatible with human flourishing, describes actual conditions better than comforting alternatives? Does engaging cosmic horror as entertainment immunize us against recognizing when we confront actual cosmic scale threats? Or does it prepare consciousness for facing realities that optimistic narratives cannot accommodate? If some knowledge genuinely destroys those who acquire it, does documenting that knowledge in fiction serve as warning or as vector for its transmission? And what exists at the suppressed center of cosmic horror's comprehensive catalog? What entity or revelation proves too disturbing to name, even in fiction dedicated to naming the unnameable? What truth exceeds even generous boundaries of horror explicitly designed to explore forbidden knowledge? What final darkness waits beyond the darkness we've already documented? These questions resist definitive answers because definitive answers would eliminate the productive uncertainty that makes cosmic horror philosophically and psychologically effective. We return to Lovecraft's entities across generations, not despite their resistance to complete understanding, but because of it, seeking in fictional cosmic indifference some framework for processing actual experiences of powerlessness, insignificance, and confrontation with realities that human cognition never evolved to comprehend. The entities persist because the anxieties they embody persist, because each technological advance raises again the question of whether expanding awareness necessarily expands vulnerability, because we cannot stop seeking knowledge even while suspecting that complete knowledge might equal complete annihilation. The catalogue of every Lovecraftian monster ends not with final revelation, but with recognition that the real horror isn't any specific entity, but the fact that consciousness itself might be the cosmic mistake, that awareness trapped us in position where we know enough to recognize our cosmic insignificance while lacking capacity to either accept that insignificance peacefully or transcend it meaningfully. We are the cosmic horror we fear, apes who achieved enough awareness to recognize the abyss while retaining enough animal nature to recoil from what that recognition implies. And the censored entity, whatever it represents, names the final recognition we cannot quite articulate, that there is no escape from consciousness except through its elimination, no refuge from cosmic truth except ignorance we've already irrevocably lost, no salvation from awareness except in the very annihilation we spend our existence desperately avoiding, while knowing it remains inevitable, universal, and ultimately, perhaps mercifully, meaningless.